Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's gentle journey will explore a question that has puzzled scientists, philosophers, and dreamers alike. If time travel will one day exist, why aren't we surrounded by travellers from the future? It's a simple question, yet it opens into something vast, like a doorway leading into deeper hallways of possibility. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly enjoy these peaceful wanderings across space, time, and the quiet corners of thought. And when you're ready, feel free to leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always comforting to see how many places we gather from, each of us drifting through our own little pocket of time. If it helps, dim the lights, set your phone aside, or let a small fan hum in the background. Let your breathing soften and allow yourself to drift, even just a little. You don't have to stay perfectly focused. If your mind wanders, that's completely fine. We'll still be right here, gently unfolding the story together. Now, with the night settling around you like a warm blanket, let's step quietly into our first chapter of thought, onto a silent platform where, strangely enough, no travellers seem to arrive. Imagine yourself standing on a peaceful train platform at dawn. The sky is pale, the air cool, and the rails stretch into the distance like two long threads pulling the future toward you. You're waiting, not for a train of this century, but for a visitor from another era entirely. Someone from centuries ahead. Someone who might step off shimmering tracks of time instead of steel and stone. And yet, no matter how long we wait, the platform remains empty. This quiet emptiness is the first great puzzle of time travel. If future humans eventually find a way to move backward through time, shouldn't we, here and now, see traces of them? Shouldn't there be wanderers observing our world the way tourists visit ancient ruins? Shouldn't some future historian be scribbling notes about our habits, our voices, our choices? Stephen Hawking once playfully tested this idea by hosting a party for time travellers. He sent the invitations after the party had already taken place. He prepared champagne, set the table, and waited. No one came. The simplicity of this absence makes the paradox feel even stronger. If time travel ever exists, the future should be filled with people capable of visiting this very moment. And yet, our world remains silent. No mysterious figures stepping out of swirling air. No cloaked visitors drifting along city streets. No sudden appearance of tourists eager to witness major historical events. It's as if time itself has placed a gentle, do not disturb sign on our century. But before assuming something is wrong with our assumptions, it's worth asking whether our expectations are shaped more by fiction than by physics. We've watched countless films where time travellers appear dramatically. Flashes of light, machines with spinning rings, someone arriving with urgency and impeccable hair. Our imagination fills in those dramatic scenes because that's what stories teach us to expect. Reality, however, is rarely that theatrical. And time, as modern physics hints, is far more subtle than the scripts we write for it. Perhaps the silence we observe isn't actually silence at all. Maybe it's a sign that our picture of time travel is incomplete, more like a sketch than a finished painting. Einstein's work suggests that time is woven into space itself, forming a single fabric. In this fabric, movement forward is easy and constant, like drifting along a river. But moving backward may not resemble a train or a doorway. It might instead require a curvature of space-time so extreme that ordinary intuition fails. Some theoretical models describe this as a path bending so far that it reconnects with its earlier self. Not a line, but a loop. Not a street, but a circle. If such loops exist, they wouldn't look like a portal or a machine. They would be regions of space-time shaped in exceptional ways, like a fold in a sheet where two distant points meet. But even this poetic idea doesn't answer the question fully. Even if time can bend, and even if loops are possible, shouldn't someone at some point in the distant future have found a way to use them? That brings us back to the platform, the empty one. Its quietness begins to take on a different meaning. Maybe the absence of visitors is not evidence of their non-existence, but evidence of constraints we don't yet understand. Perhaps the rules that govern time travel are not flexible. Perhaps they are rigid, intricate, and subtle, like a silent agreement written into the fabric of the cosmos. Or perhaps the paradox says something about us instead. Maybe our present moment is not the destination travelers would choose. Maybe this era, with all its noise, speed, and unresolved knots, is not yet a time worth visiting. Or perhaps the future looks back on us the way we look at fossils, with curiosity, but from a distance far too great to cross. As we listen to this quiet platform a little longer, we begin to wonder whether the puzzle is really a puzzle at all. It might be an invitation, a gentle nudge to consider what time travel would truly require, what it would imply, and how our assumptions shape our questions. And so, with this soft mystery settling into place, we drift into the next reflection, where the laws and shapes of time begin to reveal themselves in gentle, patient ways. When most people imagine a time traveler, the image arrives instantly, almost effortlessly. A flash of white light, the rush of displaced air, someone stepping forward with a confident stride, perhaps wearing a suit made of unfamiliar alloys, carrying sleek instruments that hum like distant electricity. Fiction has trained us well. It has given us a picture of time travelers as bold explorers, slipping through centuries with ease, documenting ancient worlds the way tourists stroll through old cities with cameras in hand. But when we pause and breathe a little more gently, it becomes clear that this expectation may be shaped less by physics and more by stories. And stories, beautiful as they are not bound to the laws that guide the universe. In films, a time traveller must reveal themselves dramatically for the plot to move forward. In reality, if such travellers exist, they might move with far less noise, more like shadows passing across the surface of a lake than lights flashing in the sky. Consider how often we project our own behaviours onto the future. We assume a time traveller would think the way we do, curious, impulsive, eager to observe ancient eras. We imagine that if we could travel backward, we would want to meet Leonardo da Vinci, or watch the first cities rise, or witness ancient civilizations constructing monuments whose purposes we still debate. It feels natural to assume that our own motivations must also belong to whoever lives in the distant tomorrow. Yet this assumption holds a quiet flaw. A civilization capable of mastering time itself, of folding space-time or stepping gracefully across centuries, may not share our desires, fears, or curiosities. Their values could drift far from ours. Their priorities might no longer include looking backward at all. They may view us the way we view distant ancestors, not with contempt or disinterest, but with the acknowledgement that their world was shaped by concerns that no longer apply. Even so, let's imagine for a moment that future humans do feel the same desire to look back. Imagine they do want to see how their distant ancestors lived. Wouldn't that mean they should be here, walking unnoticed among us? This is where another gentle layer of the paradox begins to appear. The difference between expectation and possibility. The first expectation we hold is visibility. We assume that if time travellers were present, they would look noticeably different. But reality rarely conforms to theatrical needs. Suppose a visitor from the future did arrive. What would prevent them from looking exactly like us? We already live in a world where a person from a different continent, culture, or generation can blend into a crowd with ease. Someone from 300 years in the future could step onto a busy street, tuck their hands into the pockets of a modern jacket, and disappear into the motion of the city without leaving the faintest ripple. Clothing, easily mimicked. Language, learned or translated invisibly. Tools, concealed in plain-looking objects. Appearance, human evolution does not produce dramatic changes within a few centuries. We imagine time travelers as spectacle, but they could just as easily be subtle, quiet observers who slip among us like passing thoughts. The second expectation we hold is intention. We think a traveller would want to intervene, to explore, or to correct. Yet the universe may not allow such things. Physics suggests that if time travel is possible, it likely comes with constraints, structures woven into the fabric of causality. These constraints might ensure that history cannot be changed, at least not in ways that violate the flow of events we already know, not through sudden actions, not through dramatic interference, and certainly not through anything that would create paradox or contradiction. Imagine time as a long, carefully written scroll. A traveller may unroll it, may walk upon its surface, may examine every word of the story, but the scroll itself does not permit tearing or rewriting. Their presence could be woven into the story in ways we do not notice, in ways that were always meant to be there. If so, any traveller arriving now would simply fit into the world like a person who had always belonged. Another expectation is that a time traveller would communicate with us directly. But from their perspective, reaching out to those in the past may carry consequences far more complex than we can imagine. A single conversation could shift countless lives. A single suggestion could divert the course of history. Even if their intentions were pure, the impact of their presence might be unpredictable. Perhaps the future has understood this deeply, so deeply, that they have established strict rules, spoken or unspoken, against direct contact. And there is yet another possibility. Maybe visiting the past is not a recreational activity at all. Perhaps it is a delicate scientific process carried out in controlled conditions. Researchers might observe history from the edges, never stepping too close to avoid disturbing the intricate patterns of cause and effect. If such observers exist, they may experience our world the way astronomers observe distant galaxies, quietly through instruments without making their presence known. In fiction, time travel is loud. In reality, if it exists, it may be gentle. Closer to listening through a keyhole than stepping through a door. This brings us to a final expectation, that time travel, if it's possible, should be common. But technological progress is not always evenly distributed across history. For all we know, the ability to traverse time may require astonishing amounts of energy or rare forms of matter that future humans cannot produce on a large scale. Instead of a bustling highway of visitors, time travel might be a rare event, reserved for a handful of researchers, permitted only under strict circumstances, or limited by the fragility of the space-time pathways themselves. The silence surrounding us, then, may not be a mystery at all. It may be a natural consequence of rules we do not yet understand, combined with expectations shaped by stories rather than science. The absence of travellers does not imply the absence of travel. It may simply mean that those who move through time do so quietly, respectfully, and in harmony with the deep structure of the universe. As this thought settles, like dust illuminated in the soft light of early morning, we begin to sense a new possibility. Maybe time travellers could be near without ever revealing themselves. And with that gentle shift, we drift into the next reflection, where the shapes of time itself begin to take form, curving softly beneath our imagination. When we look for time travelers, we tend to search for the extraordinary. We expect ripples in the air, shimmering distortions, or perhaps a sudden figure stepping out of a glowing threshold. We imagine a kind of temporal footprint that must surely betray their presence, something unmistakable, something cinematic. But what if the very act of searching this way reveals a misunderstanding? What if we're looking for thunder in a world where time, if it can be crossed, moves more like a drifting whisper? This question invites us to re-examine not just the possibility of time travelers, but the lens through which we expect to perceive them. Our minds are wonderfully imaginative, yet those same imaginings can limit us. We search for what stories have taught us to see, not necessarily what reality would show. Consider how often we overlook the ordinary. A stranger passing quietly through a museum, lingering a little too long at an exhibit about early technology. A person in a cafe staring at a cup of tea as though they are discovering it for the first time. A visitor at a historic site who seems deeply moved for reasons we can't quite grasp. These moments slip by because they look so normal. Perhaps too normal. If a time traveller did arrive, why would they risk being conspicuous? Why draw attention? Blending in might be their first and most necessary decision. But let's move deeper into this thought. Imagine, for a moment, that time travel requires conditions far more delicate than we assume. Not dramatic machines or spinning circles of light, but regions of space-time that curve gently into loops. Shapes nature allows but rarely forms. If someone were able to navigate such regions, the transition might not resemble a doorway at all. It might be closer to stepping into a quiet eddy in a river, letting the current shift beneath you while the surface appears undisturbed. In such a world, time travel wouldn't be something loud or bright. It would be subtle. The entry point might look like nothing more than a still moment in an otherwise ordinary space. A traveller would appear as though they had simply walked around a corner. No flash, no distortion. Just presence, as natural as someone stepping onto a sidewalk. Even this, however, assumes we would notice. But humans are remarkably unobservant when it comes to the unusual hiding inside the usual. Think of how often we overlook small details. A new painting on a familiar wall, a stranger who sits beside us on a bus, a shift in a friend's tone. Our attention, delicate and finite, filters more than it perceives. And if our perception can miss changes in our immediate world, it's easy to imagine how a time traveller, especially one trained to blend in, could pass without notice. Another layer of the puzzle lies in how we interpret evidence. Suppose a visitor from the future did something subtle, adjusted a small detail to preserve the integrity of history. If that action fits seamlessly into the chain of causes and effects we already expect, we would have no reason to view it as extraordinary. Person picking up a dropped wallet, a stranger offering a suggestion that shifts someone's path just a little. These are everyday events, yet in a world where time travel is possible, such moments could carry invisible significance. There is also the question of technology, particularly technology designed to remain unseen. If future civilizations have mastered the art of bending space-time, they may have equally refined the art of concealment. Not dramatic cloaking devices, but more elegant solutions. Tools that fold light gently around a person, or suits that blend into the environment, not by erasing the wearer, but by harmonizing with the subtle cues our brains use to recognize familiar faces and shapes. The effect would not be invisibility, but forgettability. A presence that slides effortlessly through memory without leaving a mark. This idea may feel speculative, yet it aligns with something already observable. We often remember events, not the quiet figures in the background. If time travelers move quietly, their path through our world could be as unnoticed as a breeze passing through an open window. But beyond subtle presence, perhaps the deeper issue is that we expect time travel to be accessible. That if it exists, travelers from the future would freely come and go. This expectation may misunderstand the fragile nature of temporal pathways. Even if crossing time is possible, it might require extremely precise conditions, like navigating through a narrow channel in a vast sea. Only certain moments, certain locations, or certain configurations might allow safe passage. A traveller might not be able to choose freely. They may arrive only in places where the structure of space-time permits their entry, locations we would not recognise as special. There is also the possibility that time travel is limited by causality itself. If the universe has a structure that prevents paradoxes, a traveller's movements might be restricted to scenarios that do not disturb the storyline of history. This would mean that any arrival we might observe is already woven into the tapestry of the world. If a time traveller appeared on a street yesterday, that event was always part of our past. There was never a version of our world in which they did not appear, and because it was always part of the story, it never feels like an intrusion. It feels normal. This idea is subtle, almost dreamlike. The notion that a visitor could step into our world without altering it, because their presence was always meant to be there. In such a universe, the absence of obvious travellers doesn't signal impossibility. It simply means that the universe is careful. Its structure might gently enforce consistency, allowing only those events that fit seamlessly into the pattern of what already is. Another angle lies in our limited ways of detecting anomalies. Suppose travellers move in ways that do not leave conventional traces. We search for disturbances in history, yet many forms of influence leave no mark. A nudge here, a slight correction there, barely perceptible, like shifting a single grain of sand on a vast beach. The beach remains the same. The change, though deliberate, dissolves into the background. So when we ask, why don't we see time travellers? Perhaps the answer is not that they aren't here, but that our method of looking is too narrow, shaped by expectation rather than quiet observation. The absence of spectacle may not be the absence of travellers. It may simply be the nature of time itself, soft, subtle, and careful. And as this thought settles, we drift into the next gentle question. Not whether travellers are visible, but what the fabric of time truly allows. As we drift deeper into the quiet question of where time travellers might be hiding, we eventually reach a point where imagination alone is not enough. To understand why our world may appear empty of visitors, we must peer gently into what modern physics suggests about the nature of time itself. Not through equations or symbols, those can remain folded away like delicate maps, but through images, through shapes, through the quiet ways space-time might behave when we're not looking. Imagine time not as a straight road, but as a wide sheet of fabric stretching in every direction. When this fabric is perfectly flat, events follow one after another in an orderly sequence, the way beads slide along a string. But Einstein showed us that this fabric is rarely flat. Mass and energy, stars, planets, even you, bend and curve this sheet. The stronger the mass, the deeper the dip. Like a sleeping cat pressing into a soft blanket, objects shape the space and time around them. Once you accept that time can curve, another idea emerges softly in the background. If it can bend, perhaps it can fold. And if it can fold, perhaps two moments that appear far apart could be brought close together, like two corners of a blanket pinched between your fingers. This is the seed of a concept called a closed time-like curve, a path through space-time that loops back onto itself, allowing someone who walks along it to eventually arrive at an earlier point in their own journey. The term may sound technical, but the idea is simple if we soften it. Picture a path through a forest that curls back toward its starting point. You walk forward, yet find yourself emerging from the trees into the same clearing you began from, but at an earlier time. You haven't broken the rules of nature. You've simply taken the only route that the forest allows, a route nature itself shaped long before you entered it. Physicists have discovered that certain shapes of the universe could, at least theoretically, create these looping paths. Some of these scenarios feel almost like poetry. One solution describes a cosmos that rotates so gently and uniformly that space-time itself turns like a vast cosmic whirlpool. If you follow the direction of the swirl long enough, you might find yourself drifting toward your own past. Another idea envisions an object like an infinitely long cylinder, spinning so rapidly that it drags the surrounding space-time into spirals, folding the river of time into a loop. We may never encounter such objects, but the fact that they exist as solutions, as shapes, the universe could take, tells us something important. The laws of physics do not scream impossible. Instead, they whisper, under certain circumstances. The most captivating imagery arises from wormholes, tunnels through space-time that join two distant points like secret doorways. If such a tunnel could be stabilized, and if one entrance were moved quickly or placed in a stronger gravitational field, time inside the tunnel would pass differently at each end. When brought back together, walking through one end might lead you not into a different place, but into a different moment. This idea may feel like science fiction, yet it is grounded in the same principles that make your GPS work. The satellites above you experience time differently because of their distance from Earth's gravitational pull. Their clocks tick a little faster. Not dramatically so, just a fraction of a breath faster, but enough that engineers must correct for it. If they didn't, your navigation would drift further off course every day. This quiet difference in the flow of time happening above your head right now is the same phenomenon that would allow a wormhole's two ends to fall out of sync. And yet each of these possibilities, rotating universes, spinning cylinders, wormhole doorways, arrives with a fragile condition. They seem to require forms of matter or energy that do not behave the way everyday matter does. Some of these hypothetical materials would feel lighter than nothing, as though they held negative weight. This is not negative in the sense of minus signs or strange symbols. Instead, imagine a material that doesn't sink into a blanket but lifts it, creating a slight rise instead of a depression. Such matter, if it exists, would be unlike anything we've ever touched. The universe does offer small hints of behavior that resemble this through the way certain quantum fields behave in tiny, delicate regions of space. But these hints are fleeting, like frost patterns that form and vanish before dawn can illuminate them fully. To build a time machine using such ingredients would require controlling these delicate patterns on a scale far larger than the universe currently seems willing to allow. Still, these shapes and loops matter for a reason. They reveal that the fabric of reality has more possibilities woven into it than our everyday experience suggests. They show that time is not a stern, unchanging ruler, but a landscape with valleys, ridges, and hidden passages. And if time can curve and swirl and fold, then the absence of tourists may reflect not an absence of ability, but an absence of the right conditions. Another layer emerges when we consider how fragile these structures might be. Even if the universe does allow time loops, they might be rare. So rare that civilizations could spend millennia searching for the right conditions without ever finding them. Or they might exist only for moments, flickering into stability before dissolving again, like a soap bubble catching the light and bursting. If time travel relies on finding these fragile gateways, then no traveller could wander freely. There would be no bustling crowds, no steady traffic, only the occasional solitary journey, whispered across unfathomable distances. But there is something else hidden here, something subtle. If the universe permits time loops only under strict and exotic conditions, then it may also be protecting itself from reckless disturbance. If the river of time has deep currents that occasionally circle back, those currents may be surrounded by powerful constraints, currents that resist disruption, currents that guide travellers quietly along paths that do not disturb the greater flow. In such a universe, even if time travellers exist, their presence would not be loud. It would be shaped by the currents, hidden by the bends in the river, woven into the fabric so gently that we would never see the seams. And as we let these ideas settle, we drift toward the next gentle reflection, one where the universe's desire for consistency begins to reveal why those who might travel through time can never arrive in ways that break the tapestry we already know. As we move gently deeper into the landscape of time, another quiet truth begins to rise from the shadows. Even if the universe allows certain paths to bend backward, even if loops and tunnels exist somewhere in its vast architecture, travelling through them may require ingredients far stranger and far more delicate than anything we've ever learned to handle. If space-time is a tapestry, then time travel, true physical time travel, may require threads woven from materials we've never touched, never seen, perhaps never even imagined clearly. To begin sensing this idea, imagine for a moment that you are holding a soap bubble on the tip of your finger. The bubble trembles, its thin surface shimmering with colours, each moment threatening to burst. This bubble is the closest everyday analogy to the kind of structure we would need to maintain a stable tunnel through space-time. A wormhole isn't a portal with steel beams and concrete foundations, it's more like a bubble. Something soft, fragile, and almost impossibly sensitive. In order to keep such a bubble open, the universe seems to require a peculiar form of matter, commonly described as having negative energy density. Not negative in any symbolic or mathematical sense, no chalkboard symbols or equations needed, but negative in a physical way, as if the material gently pushes outward rather than pulling inward. Imagine pressing your hand onto a mattress. A normal object like your hand makes a dent, but a material with negative energy would make the mattress rise instead, as if lifting from below. This is the essence of what physicists call exotic matter. We're not talking about monsters or mutant substances or glowing ores from science fiction films. Exotic matter simply refers to material that behaves differently from anything found in ordinary life. Instead of creating gravitational dips, it creates tiny rises. Instead of pulling space-time inward, it pushes it outward and holds it apart. And this holding apart is what a stable wormhole requires. Without it, the tunnel collapses instantly, sealing itself before anything can pass through, like a bubble popping the moment it forms. But if exotic matter is required, the next question emerges naturally. Does such material exist? The universe gives us hints, just enough to stir the imagination, but not enough to offer certainty. On the smallest scales, where quantum fields fluctuate like restless waves, there are tiny regions where energy behaves in ways that resemble this outward push. These fluctuations are fleeting, appearing and disappearing faster than a blink, existing for such brief intervals that they might as well be whispered secrets between quantum particles. Some experiments, like the famous Casimir effect, suggest that empty space is not truly empty. Two uncharged metal plates placed extremely close together feel a faint pull toward each other, not because anything pushes them, but because the empty space between them behaves differently from the space outside. This phenomenon hints that the vacuum itself contains strange energies, quiet and invisible. Yet even these quantum whispers fall far short of the sustained, large-scale effect needed to hold open a wormhole. Imagine needing not a single soap bubble, but an endless chain of bubbles, each perfectly stable, each large enough for a traveller to step through, and each immune to the slightest vibration. The challenge grows overwhelming. Even if we could gather the right kind of energy, we would need unimaginable precision to shape it into a tunnel. The slightest imbalance could cause the structure to collapse inward with a soft but definitive sigh. Let's soften this idea further. Think of a violinist attempting to play a note so pure, so delicate, that even the faintest tremor of the bow would distort it. Now imagine scaling that note until it spans light years, while still requiring the same precision. That is what creating a stable wormhole might demand, a level of control over the universe's most subtle forces that far surpasses anything human hands have ever achieved. And so, the absence of travellers begins to look less like a mystery and more like an expected consequence of the universe's design. If time travel requires materials that barely flicker into existence for an instant, perhaps no civilization, no matter how advanced, can gather enough of them to build a machine capable of spanning centuries. Or perhaps they can, but only with great difficulty, only rarely, only under extreme conditions we cannot yet fathom. Another layer to this puzzle lies in the energy required to manipulate space-time. Even bending time slightly, the way GPS satellites experience it, takes immense gravitational fields. Earth's gravity slows time just a little. Satellites high above tick a touch faster because the pull is weaker. This difference is measured in billionths of a second, yet it already matters enough that engineers must correct for it continuously. Now imagine the level of force required to twist time into a loop large enough for a person to step through. This is not a matter of more power in the everyday sense. It is more like asking the universe to rearrange its own geometry, a task that may require energies approaching those found near massive stars or swirling black holes. Perhaps the only places where time naturally folds, the only places where these loops arise without human interference, lie deep within cosmic phenomena so intense that no traveller could approach them safely. Black holes, with their immense gravity, do bend time dramatically. In some models, rotating black holes form regions where space-time twists, almost like a vortex. Yet these regions are often accompanied by deadly forces, tidal stretching, radiation and extremes no traveller could survive. The universe may allow time loops, but it does not guarantee they occur in friendly neighbourhoods. If time travel relies heavily on such extreme environments, then the lack of tourists becomes less surprising. It may simply be that the places where time can be crossed are dangerous, unstable, or too remote to be navigated reliably. The pathways exist, but they may be like narrow mountain passes during a storm, places where only the bravest, or perhaps the most desperate, would dare to tread. This gentle realization leads us to an even softer thought. Perhaps civilizations do discover time travel, but only as a fragile achievement, one that requires careful, cautious use. If a wormhole stands for only a moment, appearing like a fragile, shimmering arch before collapsing, then the opportunities for travel would be rare and unpredictable. A traveller attempting to reach our era might never arrive simply because the universe did not open the door at the right moment, and so we are left with a picture of time travel that is not impossible, but delicate, an art requiring materials that behave like uncatchable shadows, energies drawn from the deepest architecture of space-time, and conditions that may only align briefly, like stars forming a pattern only once in a millennium. If this is true, then the apparent silence of visitors might be nothing more than the whisper of a universe whose rules allow many wonders, but only under gentle and fleeting circumstances. And from this understanding, we drift naturally toward the next reflection, one where the universe reveals not only what is allowed, but what it quietly forbids. As we move further into the gentle architecture of time, a new idea begins to take shape, one that does not depend on wormholes or exotic matter or spinning cylinders, but on something far more foundational: the universe's insistence on keeping its own story coherent. This idea is known, in the language of physicists, as the self-consistency principle, but we won't hold on to the terminology too tightly. Instead, we can imagine it as the universe's quiet hand, guiding events so that the flowing tapestry of history never tangles into knots. To understand this, let's picture time not as a straight line, nor as a swirling loop, but as a storybook, one with pages already written. You can flip back to earlier chapters, run your finger over the words, even whisper the lines aloud. But no matter how many times you turn the pages, the sentences remain the same. The ink doesn't smear, the paragraphs don't shift, the characters don't suddenly make choices they never made before. The story is fixed in its structure, even if you reopen old chapters. Now imagine someone who can step back into one of those earlier chapters, someone with the ability to walk into scenes that have already unfolded. What could they do there? Could they tear out a page, rewrite a sentence, shuffle events into new orders? The self-consistency principle whispers, no. The traveller may revisit the chapter, but only in ways that were always part of that chapter to begin with. They can interact, but only in ways that maintain the overall narrative. They can act, but only in harmony with what is already written. Their presence would never feel out of place because their presence would always have been part of the story. To make this idea more concrete, imagine a small scene. A traveller visits the past with the intention of preventing a certain event, let's say the disappearance of a precious heirloom. They arrive early, hide behind a bookshelf and wait. When the moment comes, they reach out to intervene. But perhaps the floorboard creaks just as they move, startling them into silence. Perhaps someone enters the room unexpectedly. Perhaps they drop the heirloom themselves, unknowingly causing the very disappearance they tried to prevent. In each version of the scene, the universe gently adjusts circumstances so that the final result remains the same. Not because the universe is punishing them, or because it prefers one timeline over another, but because contradictions simply do not fit into its structure. The story cannot contain conflicting sentences, and so the traveller's intentions become part of a larger choreography that preserves consistency. This principle can be softened even further by imagining time as a river. No matter how you paddle, scoop, or splash, the river maintains its path toward the sea. You may cause small ripples around you, but the river's overall direction does not change. If you try to divert it down a new route, the river simply flows around your efforts, finding its original path again. A time traveller immersed in such a river could create small ripples, encounters, observations, moments, but the river will not allow them to reshape its destination. And so, the supposed paradoxes of time travel, the famous ones about preventing your own birth or stopping your grandparents from meeting, simply dissolve. In a self-consistent universe, such actions have a probability of 0, not because of any moral rule, but because the fabric of events cannot fold into a contradiction. It is as if the universe gently closes the door each time you try to step into a place where you do not belong. This perspective changes the way we look for time travelers. If visitors from the future exist, they may be invisible not because they hide from us intentionally, but because their actions cannot alter anything in a way that reveals their origins. Every step they take must align with what has already occurred. They may come to observe, learn, or reflect, but never to disrupt. They might stand in a museum, looking quietly at objects from their own distant past, yet be unable to utter a single warning or piece of advice. The moment they try, circumstances bend around them, guiding them back into the flow of events that history always recorded. Imagine a traveller handing someone a message, hoping to change the course of world events. The paper slips from their hand, carried away by a sudden gust, or the recipient discards it thinking it a prank, or the words on the page in the end inspire no action at all. Every attempt at disruption becomes a moment that fades softly back into the world's natural path, like a pebble dropped into a deep lake, a brief circle of ripples that vanish into stillness. This soft inevitability also means that travellers might already be around us without our knowing. If their presence never contradicts history, then there will be no startling footprints, no sudden intrusions, no visible disruptions. They would be woven into the existing pattern so seamlessly that we would never suspect anything unusual. A person seen in a photograph from decades ago might be dismissed as a coincidence, a look-alike, or a trick of memory. A figure in an old film reel wearing oddly modern clothing would be interpreted as a joke or a mistake. This is exactly what a consistent universe demands. Nothing stray, nothing jarring, nothing that causes its story to fracture. There is another gentle implication here. If the universe keeps its own story intact, then time travellers cannot appear in eras where their presence would cause profound instability. If someone's arrival would create a contradiction, the arrival simply cannot occur. The door to that moment never opens. The traveller cannot step through because the story would not allow it. This may be one reason our own time feels so quiet. It's not that travellers are avoiding us deliberately, but that only the moments in history capable of absorbing their presence without distortion can receive them. Those moments might exist in other centuries, in quieter pockets of history, or in eras where a single extra observer blends easily into the crowd. In this view, the absence of time travellers is not a mystery, but a natural consequence of a universe that values harmony. Their silence is not emptiness, but balance. Their invisibility is not secrecy, but necessity. This understanding sets the stage for another gentle idea, one that lies just beyond the horizon of consistency, the possibility that the universe not only guides events quietly, but actively protects them from disruption, a soft shield, rising whenever the fabric of time is threatened. And with that thought resting in the background like a quiet echo, we drift forward into the next reflection, where Hawking's invisible gatekeepers begin to illuminate why some doors in time may never open at all. As we drift further into the quiet architecture of time, another idea approaches, one that feels less like a gentle current and more like a protective presence woven into the universe itself. Earlier, we pictured time as a river that maintains its course, refusing to let paradoxes tangle its flow. But Stephen Hawking suggested something more active, something almost watchful. He proposed that the universe doesn't simply favour consistency, it may actually enforce it, firmly, silently, and without hesitation. He called this idea chronology protection. But rather than clinging to the terminology, we can translate it into softer imagery. The universe is a quiet guardian, tending the boundaries of time like a patient caretaker who ensures no one wanders into rooms that were never meant to be entered. To understand why this guardian might exist, imagine again the idea of time loops, those soft swirling paths through space-time. While they are beautiful in theory, they come with potential complications. If someone could wander freely into their own past, they might attempt to alter events, even if unintentionally. And if such changes were allowed, history could become unstable, like a tapestry where threads are constantly being pulled apart and rewoven, never settling into a coherent pattern. The universe, however, seems to prefer patterns that endure, and so Hawking suggested that whenever conditions arise that might allow a time loop to form, a wormhole held open too long, or the edges of a rotating space-time beginning to curl back on themselves, something subtle and powerful activates in the background. Not a thunderclap, not a flare, but an increase in small, restless fluctuations that grow stronger and stronger until they prevent the loop from stabilizing. To soften this idea, picture a doorway that appears briefly in the fog. At first it looks solid, promising, even inviting. But as you approach, the fog thickens, the ground shifts, and the doorway dissolves before you can step through. In Hawking's view, the universe behaves just like that. It allows the possibility of time loops to shimmer into existence, but pushes them away when approached too closely. These fluctuations are sometimes described using symbols and equations, but in gentle terms they're simply the nervous energy of the universe, tiny vibrations in the fabric of reality that usually remain quiet and small. Yet when time begins to twist toward a loop, these vibrations grow like a murmuring crowd rising into a warning roar. The closer the loop comes to forming, the louder the crowd becomes, until the noise is too great and the structure collapses. Think of a soap bubble forming at the end of a wand. A perfect sphere begins to swell, glowing with reflected light. But if the bubble grows too large, or if the air around it becomes turbulent, the surface trembles. The film thins, the bubble bursts. A time loop, in Hawking's view, behaves exactly like that bubble. The moment the loop threatens to become usable, something you could step into, its fragile surface collapses into nothing. This quiet but constant defense mechanism is what Hawking jokingly referred to as the universe's chronology protection agency. In his playful words, this agency prevents the appearance of time travelers, so the world is safe for historians. But beneath the humour lies a profound insight. If the universe truly has such a mechanism, then time travel into the past may be physically impossible, not because it breaks logic, but because it breaks the stability of space-time itself. This would explain elegantly and naturally why we never see visitors from the future. The universe simply never allows the conditions required for their arrival. Wormholes collapse the moment they could be used as time machines. Curled regions of space-time unravel before they can fold fully into loops. Any device built to manipulate time is met with gentle but absolute resistance, like a hand quietly closing the book before a reader reaches forbidden pages. But we do not need to imagine a hostile universe. The Guardian is not stern, it is protective. It behaves like a parent who gently prevents a child from playing near a deep well. The restriction is not punishment, but preservation. A universe where time loops can be used freely might devolve into incoherence. Causes might no longer lead to effects. Events might collide or break apart. Life itself might struggle to exist in such a turbulent sea of contradictions. In this view, the absence of time travelers is not a disappointment, but a sign that we live in a stable world, one where moments lead softly into moments, where memories remain trustworthy, where history is anchored rather than adrift. Yet Hawking's idea also allows room for hope. Just because the universe defends against large-scale time loops doesn't mean it forbids all forms of temporal movement. We know that time can stretch and compress under gravity, that clocks tick differently depending on their speed and position. These effects, though gentle, remind us that time is flexible, even if it is not breakable. Perhaps the universe allows us to explore time like a shallow tide pool, even if it bars us from diving into its deepest trenches. And so we arrive at a kind of truce. Time travel into the past may be forbidden, but time travel into the future is not only allowed, it is happening already. Astronauts orbiting the Earth age slightly less than those on the ground because time passes a little slower for them. This is not time travel as fiction paints it, but a real, measurable effect. A soft sliding along the river rather than a leap across it. In this sense, Hawking's Guardian is not closing all doors, it simply closes the ones that would unravel the tapestry of history. The future remains open to us. We move toward it constantly, carried along by the river's current. And if we accelerate or climb to greater heights, we experience that current differently. But when we look back, when we search for travellers from centuries ahead, their absence may reflect the kindness of the universe's design. A universe that lets its story unfold in peace. A universe that cherishes continuity. A universe that quietly closes dangerous doors so that life can persist. And as this gentle thought settles, we drift toward another possibility. Even if the universe guards these boundaries, what if travellers still manage to slip through in ways so subtle that we never notice them at all? Imagine the past as a vast tapestry stretched across an endless hall, threads of every colour woven together in patterns so intricate that no single hand could ever recreate them. Each moment in history is a stitch, connected to 100 others, forming an enormous design we call the world's memory. Now imagine a visitor stepping quietly into that hall, arriving from far ahead in time. They approach the tapestry, raise a hand, and consider tugging on one of the threads. But there is a problem. The tapestry is delicate. If they pull too hard, the pattern unravels. Threads snap, colours shift, shapes distort. The very image of the world could collapse into something unrecognisable. This fragile relationship between travellers and the past brings us into the realm of the tourist rules. Not laws written on paper, but natural constraints written into the fabric of time itself. Real or imagined, these rules flow from the same logic that we have explored in earlier reflections. The universe does not permit contradiction. The past once woven cannot be reshaped without tearing the story apart. And so, even if a traveller steps into the past, their actions must remain gentle, subtle, and always consistent with what has already unfolded. To soften this idea, think of a visitor in a museum. They walk among ancient artifacts, careful not to touch anything too fragile, knowing that one wrong gesture could undo centuries of preservation. A time traveller may feel something similar, not because of museum guards or alarms, but because the universe itself enforces this caution. The first rule, then, is simple. The past must remain the past. A traveller cannot alter it in ways that generate contradictions. They cannot save someone who is known to have died, cannot destroy something known to have existed, cannot plant ideas that appear from nowhere. History is not a sandbox. It is a fixed pattern, and any action taken within it must already be part of that pattern. This idea maps gently onto what we earlier referred to as the self-consistency of the universe. If time has a natural tendency to maintain its own coherence, then travellers walking backward along its path will find themselves guided, nudged, or quietly constrained so that their actions flow along the grooves already carved into the tapestry. Yet many stories imagine time travellers with bold freedom, erasing the past, altering battles, rescuing figures from tragedy. Why does fiction so often imagine these dramatic possibilities? Perhaps because fiction thrives on tension and change, on the thrill of rewriting what seems unchangeable. But the universe may not share that appetite. Reality, with all its subtlety, seems far more protective of its timeline. This brings us naturally to the idea of a temporal prime directive, a term borrowed from the imagination of storytellers, but deeply aligned with the logic of Novikov's principle. It is the notion that travellers from the future, if they exist, would be bound by ethical or scientific rules against interfering with the past. Not because of morality alone, but because interference might unleash consequences too tangled to predict. Imagine telling a single person, centuries ago, a fragment of knowledge too advanced for their time. Even a small hint might ripple outward like a stone tossed into a pond. The ripples spread, shifting events in unpredictable directions. The world that emerges might be vastly different. Too different. Perhaps so unstable that the future from which the traveller came would no longer exist. And so, whether by natural law or by virtues born in a distant civilization, travellers may follow a rule of non-interference, not as a burden, but as an act of self-preservation. But rules alone cannot explain everything. Consider instead a more subtle possibility. Travellers may not be forbidden to interfere, they simply cannot. Not because of written laws, but because the fabric of time itself refuses to support actions that create inconsistency. You may attempt to pick up a thread in the tapestry, but your fingers slip. You may try to deliver a warning, but the person cannot hear you clearly, or disregards your words, or misinterprets your intentions. Tiny frustrations that, in isolation, seem random. But taken together, they form a quiet pattern. Your actions were never meant to succeed. This viewpoint, gentle yet profound, paints the universe as a place that protects its own continuity. And within such a place, time travellers become observers, not sculptors, of history. Which leads us to another rule. If travellers exist, they must blend in. Think of someone arriving in a bustling marketplace centuries ago. Bright clothing or unfamiliar tools would draw attention. Questions would arise. Fear might follow. For safety and consistency, the visitor must become inconspicuous, resembling those around them. But what does blending in look like in a modern world? Perhaps surprisingly simple. Today, people from different cultures, time periods, and fashion styles already move through cities without raising alarm. A traveller from centuries ahead could wear a modest coat, speak gently, keep their head down, and pass without notice. Camouflage, then, is not a technological necessity, it is a social one. Yet advanced civilizations might also possess tools that make blending in even easier. Not invisibility, but forgettability. A kind of natural misdirection where human attention simply glides past them. We already experience this in small ways. The stranger whose face you cannot recall, the passerby whose presence fades from memory the moment they turn a corner. A traveller from the future might rely on this natural human tendency, enhanced by subtle technologies or simply guided by their training. But no matter how they blend in, they must remain careful. Any obvious sign of interference, a piece of unfamiliar knowledge, a device out of place, a premature innovation, could disrupt the delicate weave of events. And so they move quietly, observing rather than influencing, learning rather than teaching. Their presence becomes a soft thread woven into our world, indistinguishable from the threads already there. In this light, the absence of visible time travellers becomes less mysterious. It transforms from a question of why aren't they here to one of how would we ever know if they were? Silence does not imply absence, it may imply discipline, necessity, or even reverence for the fragility of time. This perspective gently prepares us for the next idea, one even softer and more intriguing. If direct interference is impossible, could travellers still guide history through subtle, feather-like touches that align with what was always meant to be? We drift now toward that possibility, toward the quiet realm of influences so delicate that they slip through history without changing its shape, yet still add their own faint brushstrokes to the tapestry of time. If time travellers cannot interfere boldly and cannot reveal themselves openly, then another question drifts into view like a feather settling on still water. What if their influence, if it exists at all, is something so light, so delicately placed, that it becomes nearly impossible to notice. Not the dramatic butterfly effect we hear about in stories, where a single wing beat triggers hurricanes halfway across the world, but a gentler, quieter idea. A correction instead of a disruption, a nudge instead of a shove. To explore this thought, imagine the universe as a vast mobile, one of those carefully balanced sculptures made of rods and small suspended shapes, moving softly in the breeze. Every piece depends on the others. Touch one part too strongly, and the entire structure trembles unpredictably. But touch it lightly, just a fingertip adjusting one string, and the motion becomes harmonious again. This is the essence of the feather touch theory. If travellers can influence the past at all, the influence must be so soft that it fits naturally into the world that already exists. No contradictions, no new histories, no sudden shifts, only slight corrections that preserve the tapestry rather than distort it. To sense how soft these touches would need to be, imagine a piano tuner adjusting the tension of a single string. They do not twist the peg wildly. They listen, breathe, and move slowly. A slight tightening brings a discordant note back into harmony. Too much, and the string snaps. A time traveller attempting to influence events might behave just the same, listening to the rhythm of history, waiting for the right moment, and applying the faintest pressure to ensure the melody continues. But what might such delicate touches look like from our perspective? Consider the peculiar moments in history where ideas seem to burst into the world as if from nowhere. Periods where several thinkers, living far apart and unaware of each other, suddenly arrive at the same discovery at nearly the same time. The invention of calculus by two mathematicians independently. The formulation of evolutionary theory by two naturalists continents apart. The birth of quantum mechanics from multiple minds all racing toward the same strange horizon. Of course, there are natural explanations, cultural shifts, scientific foundations, shared influences, but every so often the timing feels uncanny, like a series of lanterns lighting up simultaneously in distant rooms. Could such synchronicities hide tiny nudges? Not enough to change the path of history, but enough to ensure it stays on the path it already seems inclined toward? Or take the smaller coincidences, those sudden, unexpected moments that tip the balance of events. A traveller misses a doomed flight because their alarm clock failed. A scientist opens the wrong book and finds the answer they had struggled with for years. A passerby's question gives an artist the final insight for a masterpiece. Patterns that seem to whisper of a guiding hand, yet dissolve completely under scrutiny, leaving no trace. If time travellers are bound by self-consistency, then any influence they exert must mesh perfectly with events we already know. Their presence cannot create something radically new. They cannot cause an invention that was never meant to exist, or save someone who was always destined to be lost. But they could, at least in theory, encourage those who were already close to discovering something essential. A wordless reminder, a chance encounter, a momentary coincidence, none of which change history, yet all of which subtly support the history that already was. But even this gentle possibility enters delicate terrain. How does one guide without altering? How can a touch so soft make any difference at all? Perhaps the answer lies in how dynamic human behaviour truly is. We are influenced constantly by moods, by weather, by small conversations, by fleeting impressions. A single moment of clarity can change the course of someone's choices in ways that remain entirely consistent with who they are. The feather touch theory imagines that if travellers act, they act only within those natural tendencies, never pushing someone into an unlikely action, only helping them reach an insight they were already approaching. Imagine a traveller standing quietly on a sidewalk watching a future leader pass by. The leader pauses, sensing something, maybe a feeling of reassurance or a sudden thought that seems to appear from nowhere. They continue walking, carrying with them a renewed sense of purpose that was always possible, always within them, but perhaps needed the lightest external spark. Or picture a researcher sitting at a desk late at night surrounded by stacks of papers. They're close to understanding something groundbreaking, but exhaustion clouds their mind. A traveller does nothing more than turn on a streetlight outside, creating a pool of warm light that seeps through the window and lifts the researcher's spirits just enough for one last attempt. A tiny shift, a moment that feels ordinary, yet it aligns with the path history has always recorded. These are not interventions that rewrite events, they are harmonizations that support what was always destined to occur. The key is that nothing new is introduced, nothing is changed. Only the smallest drift is corrected, the way a sailor adjusts the angle of a sail by a fraction of a degree to stay on course. This idea is speculative, of course. No evidence compels us to accept it, but it fits beautifully with the constraints we've already explored. If travellers cannot contradict the past, and cannot reveal themselves, and cannot disrupt the tapestry, then their only option, should they wish to influence events at all, is gentle alignment. Soft, quiet, nearly invisible. And that brings us to the most intriguing part. Even if such touches happen, we would never know. They would leave no contradiction in their wake, no trace of foreign influence, no evidence sharp enough to distinguish a deliberate nudge from a natural coincidence. It would be like watching a leaf fall in the wind and trying to determine whether its path was guided or random. Perhaps this is why the world feels both structured and unpredictable, an intricate balance of patterns and surprises. If travellers walk among these patterns, their hands must be feather-light, their presence untraceable, their influence dissolving instantly into the vast river of cause and effect. And with that quiet possibility in mind, we drift toward yet another soft question. If their influence is subtle rather than non-existent, could travellers actually be among us, present, observant, and unseen? The next reflection begins to open that door. As we drift into this next stretch of thought, a gentle wondering begins to take shape, like a soft ripple spreading across the surface of a quiet pond. If time travellers cannot interfere openly, and if their influence must be featherlight, then another possibility emerges almost naturally. What if they are here, but simply unnoticed? Not because they hide dramatically, or cloak themselves in shimmering invisibility, but because the world is already filled with places where a quiet observer can blend effortlessly into the background. Imagine walking through a museum on a slow afternoon. The air is still, footsteps echo softly across polished floors, and visitors move through each exhibit with quiet attention. Among them could stand someone from centuries ahead, hands clasped behind their back, their eyes lingering not on the grandest displays, but on small, ordinary artifacts no one else seems to notice. Perhaps they study a simple tool or a faded letter with an intensity that feels out of place. And yet, such a person would not draw alarm. We would assume them to be a historian, a researcher, or simply someone lost in thought. In a setting like this, the difference between a scholar and a time traveller becomes almost imperceptible. The truth is, our world naturally allows for anonymity. In a crowded street, in a quiet cafe, in a library where silence hangs like soft dust in the air, people drift around each other without truly looking. We glance, but we do not see. We pass, but we do not remember. This natural forgetfulness forms a kind of camouflage all on its own. A traveller from the future would not need elaborate disguises. They would need only to behave like any other person absorbed in their own thoughts. And yet, it is possible that future civilizations have developed ways to blend even more seamlessly. Not invisibility in the dramatic sense, not a sudden vanishing act, but something subtler. Perhaps clothing woven with materials that gently redirect light in ways our eyes cannot distinguish, creating a kind of muted presence. Not a disappearance, but a blending. The way a stone lying in a shallow stream appears both present and part of the water around it. Or imagine a small device, no larger than a button, that softens the mind's tendency to focus on the wearer. Not mind control or manipulation, just a gentle nudge that encourages the observer's gaze to drift away. Something that takes advantage of our very human habit of letting our attention slide past quiet figures. In a world already full of distractions, the simplest shift of focus would be enough. This brings us to the idea of temporal cloaking, a concept whispered about in advanced physics and speculative discussions. But rather than discussing it with technical terminology, we can soften it into imagery. Imagine a curtain in time itself, a fold in the sequence of moments that lets a person step slightly out of sync with the gaze of others. They are present, but never quite in the instant where eyes linger. Like a figure walking behind a moving waterfall of seconds, always a heartbeat out of view. Whether such techniques exist or remain purely imaginative, the effect would be the same. A traveller could explore without leaving a trace, walking through our world like an unseen observer, studying the flow of events while remaining safely outside our perception. But even without such technology, consider how easily we overlook the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. Think about the dozens of faces you pass each day, the person standing beside you at a crosswalk, the one reading a book 2 tables away in a cafe, the traveller sitting on a bench in a train station, gazing at people rushing past. These individuals might carry entire worlds within them, personal histories, dreams, fears, but we catch only glimpses before they vanish into the rhythm of their own lives. A time traveller could slip into any of these scenes, unnoticed, unremarked upon. If they chose not to disturb anything, no one would question their presence. They would be just another thread woven into the day. There's also the question of behaviour. A traveller from the future would likely enter our time with great caution, aware of the fragility of the era they're studying. They would move gently, speak softly, avoid drawing attention. They might watch more than they talk, observe more than they participate. This quiet presence, combined with our own tendency to overlook the subtle, would make them indistinguishable from any other reflective or introverted passerby. Imagine one standing at the back of a lecture hall, listening to a professor explain theories that the traveller learned centuries ago. They do not interrupt, even if the explanation is incomplete. They simply watch, perhaps feeling a sense of nostalgia for ideas that shaped their civilization's earlier steps. Or imagine one wandering through a city at night, taking in the glow of streetlights, the sound of passing cars, the hum of human life. They might marvel at the way we live, so busy, so unaware of the vast future unfolding ahead. But from the outside, they appear simply as a person enjoying the night air. And what about moments where the past must be documented? A traveller might carry tools that resemble nothing we know, yet appear ordinary to our eyes. Perhaps a pen or a small notebook that needs no ink, or a tiny device disguised as a trinket, recording nothing more than the faint vibrations of the world around it. We would dismiss it as a toy, a decoration, or a keepsake. This leads to an intriguing possibility. The presence of hidden observers may already be captured in photographs, videos, or eyewitness accounts. Yet we overlook them because they blend perfectly with the context. A traveller wearing slightly unusual clothing might be dismissed as eccentric, A person who appears in the background of old film footage might be labelled as coincidence. Even when people notice something strange, we're quick to rationalise it away, preferring the comfort of what we already understand. But here is the key. If travellers exist, and if they follow the silent rules of consistency, then they cannot reveal themselves to us openly. They cannot grant interviews, cannot display advanced devices, cannot announce their origin. Any such action could fracture the continuity of history, and so they remain quiet, like astronomers observing distant planets through telescopes, watching worlds that will never see them in return. In the same way, a time traveller may walk among us the way we walk among ancient ruins, respectfully, cautiously, knowing that the slightest touch could cause unintended consequences. They might sit in a cafe, sipping coffee for the first time. They might walk through a library, running their fingers over the bindings of books that their society considers ancient relics. They might observe a conversation between two strangers, learning not about the event itself but about the human experience, and we in turn would go on with our lives, unaware that a visitor from centuries ahead passed us quietly in the grocery store aisle or brushed past us gently on the sidewalk. This idea, soft and speculative, opens the door to yet another possibility, one that invites imagination without demanding belief. If travellers exist, maybe they rarely intervene, but perhaps they sometimes guide history through tiny whispered influences. Or perhaps they visit entirely different branches of reality, leaving our world as one of the undisturbed paths in the forest of timelines. As this gentle thought settles, we drift toward the next reflection, one where the river of time divides into countless streams, and where travellers may wander through paths that resemble ours but are never quite the same. As we drift deeper into the gentle question of why time travellers remain unseen, another possibility rises softly into view, one that does not rely on invisibility, camouflage, or delicate influence. Instead, it suggests something far more sweeping, like the widening of a landscape as fog slowly lifts. It asks us to imagine time not as a single river flowing through a narrow valley, but as a great delta, branching into countless tributaries, each one a slightly different version of reality. This idea often goes by a technical name in physics, but we can set that aside for now. Instead, we can imagine a forest, an immense ancient forest, where every path splits into two, then two again, stretching outward in infinite directions. Each path is a world, each world is real, and each world holds its own version of history, unfolding in ways both familiar and foreign. Some paths curve close to ours, almost touching. Others wander far away, lost in the deep woods of possibility. Now imagine a time traveller stepping into the past. Not our past, but a past along a nearby path. They walk among people who look familiar, who speak languages they know, who live in a world almost indistinguishable from their own. But it is not the same. It is a sibling world, born from a moment where events split gently, like two leaves drifting apart on a quiet stream. If this is how time travel truly works, if moving into the past means stepping sideways into another branch rather than backward along our own, then the paradox of invisible travellers dissolves like mist. They are not here because they cannot reach here. Our timeline, with all its beauty and strangeness, is simply one among countless pathways, and travellers arriving from the future find themselves entering branches adjacent to ours, never ours directly. To understand why this might be, imagine time as a woven cloth. Each thread runs alongside many others, touching at different points, but each maintaining its own path. A traveller pulling gently on one thread does not tug the entire cloth backward. They slip along the weave to a neighbouring thread, a world that resembles ours closely enough to feel familiar, yet different enough to preserve the integrity of our own timeline. In this forest of timelines, our world might be just one quiet trail. It may not intersect with the trails that travellers use, or perhaps it intersects only rarely, so rarely that the presence of a traveller in our reality is like a leaf falling without a sound somewhere deep in the woods, never noticed, never recorded. This perspective offers a gentle explanation for why history appears untouched. Even if travellers are moving through time across the vast multiverse, their actions ripple only through the branch they occupy. Our branch remains untouched, quiet, uninterrupted. There is something soothing, almost comforting in this idea. It suggests that our world is not being watched or influenced by unseen hands, not because visitors do not exist, but because they journey through different halls of history. Our past belongs to us alone. But this also brings a softer, more introspective question. What makes our branch the one we experience? In the forest metaphor, each path is equally real, equally valid, equally alive. Our path is simply the one our consciousness occupies, like standing on a particular hill in a vast range. We see the world from this hill, not because it is special, but because it is where we stand. From here, the other hills are invisible, shrouded by gentle distance. If travellers enter different branches, they may encounter versions of us slightly altered, our familiar faces with different choices behind them, different stories, different outcomes. They may meet people who resemble us so closely that confusion stirs in their hearts. And yet, we would never know. To us, the forest appears as a single path. The branching is invisible from within. Imagine a traveller walking through a market in a neighbouring branch. The fruits on the stalls are the same, the air smells of the same spices, the people bargain with familiar gestures. But somewhere in the distance, a building stands where none stands in our world. A street curves in a direction that feels strange. A melody played by a musician at the corner sounds familiar, yet carries notes we have never heard. The traveller might feel a quiet ache, a sense of being almost home, but not quite. They move gently through the crowd, taking care not to disturb anything, knowing that every action flows naturally within this branch. And when they return to their own timeline, they carry memories of a world that feels like a half-forgotten dream. This brings us to another soft and profound possibility. Perhaps our world is not empty of visitors because they avoid us, but because our path through time is uniquely stable. Maybe it's like a calm river running through a quiet valley, while nearby rivers twist through rapids, waterfalls, and unpredictable terrain. Travellers might choose branches where time is easier to navigate, paths where the currents of history are gentler, or where their presence creates fewer complications. Our world may simply be a quiet corner of the cosmic forest. This does not diminish its value. In fact, it makes our timeline feel uniquely peaceful, like a still glade far from the noise of busy trails, a place left undisturbed not by neglect, but by the natural geography of time itself. Another gentle implication of branching timelines is that our decisions, every choice, every thought, every moment may echo across nearby branches. When we choose one path, a version of us chooses another. These echoes create a complex pattern of lives unfolding in parallel, like lanterns glowing softly throughout the forest. Some lanterns burn brightly, others flicker, but all are part of the same endless landscape of possibility. If travellers move through this forest, they might choose to visit the branches with the clearest lanterns, those most aligned with their goals or curiosities. Ours may simply be too distant, too quiet, too contentedly unremarkable to be a common destination. But this quietness holds its own beauty. It means that our world is governed gently by the flow of its own story, untouched by interference from outside branches. We write our history with our own hands. Our past belongs to us alone. And so, when we look around and find no visitors, no strange anomalies, no signs of history bending beneath foreign footsteps, perhaps the explanation is simple. Time travelers are real, but they walk on different paths. Other worlds receive their footprints. Ours receives only the tranquil silence of our own unfolding. As this thought settles like a leaf drifting to the forest floor, we begin to sense the approaching horizon of a deeper question. What does their absence say about our future? We drift now into that reflection. As we drift into the deeper stillness of this journey, a new question rises gently, one that feels less like science and more like quiet introspection. If time travelers are not here, not visible, not stirring the threads of our world, perhaps the reason lies not in physics or timelines or cosmic guardianship, but in something far more human, the nature of our future itself. This thought does not arrive with urgency. It comes slowly, like a tide returning to shore. We look around our world, filled with its joys, its flaws, its hopes and uncertainties, and we wonder, what if the silence of time travelers tells us something about the paths ahead rather than the paths behind? There is a gentle possibility, one that touches the mind with a soft melancholy, that humanity may never reach the kind of future where time travel becomes real, practical, or widespread. Perhaps our species walks only a certain distance along the river of time before it changes form, or fades, or shifts in ways we cannot predict. It's not a frightening thought, it's simply one possibility among many. Civilizations rise, flourish, transform, and sometimes end. Ours is no exception. If the secret of bending time remains forever beyond reach, then naturally no visitors from the future would appear. The absence would be silent but expected. But another possibility rests nearby, quiet yet profound. Perhaps time travel does come into existence one day, but the conditions surrounding it are rare, fragile, or short-lived. A breakthrough could occur, a moment in the far future when someone discovers the first thread that can be woven backward into the past. But this thread might remain delicate, like a bridge that sways dangerously in the wind. Perhaps only a few can cross it. Perhaps it collapses soon after being built. If such a moment exists in our future, it might be brief, flickering like the flame of a match in a dark cave. History could simply be too vast for that brief flame to cast its light all the way back to us. Then there is a softer but more unsettling thought. What if the future does reach time travel, but chooses not to return here, not to this particular century, not to this era of noise and turbulence? From their vantage point, our age might seem chaotic, unpredictable, saturated with rapid change. They may consider this time as we consider stormy seas, fascinating, powerful, but dangerous to enter. Imagine future historians looking back at our era. They see technological upheaval, environmental uncertainty, political tension, moments where small changes could ripple outward with uncontrollable consequences. To them, our world might appear like an unfinished painting, still wet with movement. Stepping into such a dynamic period might risk destabilizing not only the past but the future they come from. And so they avoid it, not out of disregard but out of caution. In this picture, the timeline becomes a kind of coastline. Certain stretches are safe for landing while others are marked on the map with quiet warnings, unstable shores, do not dock. Our era might simply be one of those marked regions, a stretch of shifting sand that travellers admire from a distance but never touch. This idea carries a strange kind of grace. It allows us to see ourselves not as forgotten, but as respected, our era left undisturbed because of its volatility and importance. But another possibility hovers nearby, soft and bittersweet. Perhaps the future civilization capable of time travel no longer remembers us clearly. Imagine an ancient family album where some photographs have faded and others are no longer recognized by the youngest generation. Our era might be one of those blurred images, too distant, too ordinary, too overshadowed by later events to attract visitors. In this sense, the future's silence becomes less a judgment and more an accident of perspective. We feel our age intensely because we live in it, but in the vast landscape of time, this century may be just a small hill between towering mountains, a footnote, not a headline. To capture this feeling, imagine a family looking back on its lineage. Generations later, the stories of great-great-grandparents remain vivid, but certain uncles, cousins, or quiet ancestors vanish into anonymity. Not because they were unimportant, but because history's memory is selective. Some eras shine brightly, others remain softly dimmed. Our time may simply be one of those dimmer stretches, still meaningful, still alive, but not a prime destination for visitors peering backward through centuries. Yet even this idea opens into another possibility, something more contemplative. What if time travelers avoid our era because it represents a turning point, a moment where humanity's future diverges into many fragile possibilities? Travelers might be forbidden to enter such a branching point, the same way hikers avoid disturbing ground where new seedlings are growing. The future may view the early 21st century as a seedbed, sensitive, still sprouting, not to be touched. This leads us to a final thought, one that rests gently on the edge of speculation. Perhaps time travelers do visit the past, but they prefer moments quieter than ours, eras where human civilization has stabilized, grown peaceful, matured into something different. In such a future, our present might appear like a turbulent period in adolescence. Important, yes, but not necessarily pleasant or inviting to revisit. Think of how we rarely revisit our most chaotic years, even if they shaped us. The future may feel the same, and so the silence around us may not be emptiness at all. It may be a kind of respect or protection, or simply the natural rhythm of history choosing which moments shine brightly enough to attract retrospective travellers. In this gentle frame, the absence of visitors doesn't reflect a flaw. It reflects the quiet humility of being part of a much larger story. A story whose future chapters may be too distant, too transformed, or too delicate to send their observers back to this moment. As this understanding settles softly within us, we drift toward another possibility entirely. Maybe our era is not merely avoided, but deliberately marked as forbidden, a time where the doors must remain closed for reasons we have yet to imagine. And with that thought drifting like a faint echo, we move gently into the next reflection. There is a certain hush that falls over the mind when we ask whether our time, this exact era we're living in, might simply be off limits. Not because it is unworthy, or uninteresting, or dull, but because it may be too turbulent, too sensitive, or too dangerously pivotal for any visitor from the future to safely step into. Like a stretch of ocean marked on ancient maps with warnings of shifting sandbars, unpredictable storms, or reefs just beneath the surface, our century may be one of those places where even the bravest navigators choose not to sail. To approach this idea gently, imagine the timeline as a coastline. Some beaches are calm and welcoming, the sand soft beneath the feet. Others, just a few miles away, churn with strong undertows and unpredictable currents. A traveller stepping onto a calm beach can explore freely, leaving only footprints. but stepping onto a dangerous shore could throw them into waves that reshape both their path and the coastline itself. Our era, the early decades of the 21st century, might be one of those churning shores. We live in a time of extraordinary change. Technology evolves faster than we can fully understand it. Cultures shift rapidly. Economies rise and fall in waves that echo across the world. Our political landscapes are marked by volatility. Our environment teeters on delicate thresholds. In short, this is a century where even a small nudge, one conversation, one decision, one idea, can shift the trajectory of events in profound ways. If time travelers must operate under the quiet constraints of consistency, then entering such an era would be risky. Any significant action could upset the fragile balance of the time we inhabit. A single misplaced word might spark a chain of events that cascades like falling dominoes, altering history in ways that ripple far beyond the traveller's intent. Even a well-meaning gesture might introduce small instabilities that grow into something unpredictable. To understand this better, imagine history as a giant spinning top. When the top spins steadily, smooth and balanced, touching it lightly will not change its motion. But when the top begins to wobble, even the smallest tap can send it spiralling in wildly different directions. Our century may be a wobbling top, full of motion, energy and possibility, but also incredibly sensitive to disturbance. A future civilization may look at this wobbling moment with care, recognizing it as a turning point. One of those rare periods when humanity stands at the crossroads of multiple possible futures. They might treat it the way scientists treat unstable chemical reactions, with distance, respect, and caution. Watching closely, but never placing their hands too near. And so, the idea of a temporal quarantine emerges, not as a punishment, but as a protective measure. A gentle cordon placed around certain eras where interference of any kind could unravel the delicate strands holding the future together. Our century might be one such quarantined region. Travellers might be allowed to visit quieter periods, the peaceful valleys of history, but forbidden from stepping into our roaring canyon. This concept is not far from what we already do in our own world. Certain ecosystems are protected, certain ruins are fenced off, certain artifacts are handled only with gloves. We understand that some things are too fragile to be touched carelessly. Why wouldn't a future civilization view the timeline with the same care? To soften this idea even further, imagine a grand library of time, where each era is a book. Some books are open for reading, pages turning easily. Others are locked behind glass, not because they hold secrets, but because their pages are fragile, the ink still drying. A time traveller may walk through this library, passing row upon row of stories, but when they reach the section containing our age, they might see a quiet sign that reads, "Handle with care. Do not disturb." In this metaphor, our era becomes something tender and unfinished, a chapter still being written. Any visitor who steps too close could smudge the ink, blur the words, change the page before the story has fully formed. And so, the safest option is to step around it. Another gentle angle comes from the possibility that our world is undergoing transitions that future societies understand far better than we do. Environmental changes, technological leaps, forces, social, political, psychological, that churn beneath the surface of everyday life. These currents might be more volatile than we realize. To a future observer, our time might resemble a tectonic plate on the brink of shifting. One wrong step could trigger a quake. If time travel does exist, then the future may enforce rules preventing travelers from entering periods with high instability. These rules might be written into scientific protocols, ethical codes, or even the design of the machines themselves. Perhaps attempting to travel to certain centuries triggers automatic safeguards, much like modern aircraft avoid flying into storms. And if these safeguards exist, then no one from the future could arrive in our world, even if they desired to. The technology itself would gently refuse to bring them here. But there is yet another side to this hypothesis, one that casts our era not as dangerous, but as sacred. Think of ancient rituals that declare certain moments protected or untouched. Think of how we preserve moments of birth, death, or transformation with quiet reverence. A future civilization might view our century as a sacred threshold, a moment where humanity begins to shape its destiny more consciously. It might be considered disrespectful or even unethical to intrude upon such a time. Not because we are fragile, but because we are becoming something new. In this view, our world is not forbidden in the sense of danger, but forbidden in the sense of respect. A quiet stillness settles into this idea. We begin to see our time not as ignored or avoided, but as something valuable, something worthy of privacy, a moment the universe wants us to experience fully on our own, without interference, without foreknowledge, without visitors whispering hints of what lies ahead. This too would explain their silence. And as this thought settles like a feather on soft ground, we find ourselves drifting toward another possibility entirely, one that asks whether the future may have simply evolved so far beyond us that visiting our century feels less like stepping into an interesting past and more like returning to a forgotten prologue. We move now toward that quiet contemplation. There is a certain tenderness in imagining the future, not as a place filled with danger or silence, but as something that has simply grown beyond the world we know, a place where minds, bodies, or even the flow of time itself may have changed so deeply that our era holds no urgent pull, no special gravity. Instead of imagining the future avoiding us out of caution, we can imagine it drifting gently past us out of natural evolution, much as adults drift past the toys or photographs from their earliest childhood without feeling the need to revisit them. To soften this idea, imagine the passage of time as a long staircase spiraling upward. At the bottom are the early days of humanity, filled with firelight and stone tools. Higher up are the centuries of exploration, invention, and change. And above those steps, far above, could lie futures so unlike our present that our century becomes a distant landing on a staircase we have long since climbed. Not forgotten, perhaps, but no longer a place the future feels the need to return to. This is not a dismissal. It's simply the nature of growth. Think of how we experience our own past. Childhood homes feel small when we revisit them as adults. Old classrooms seem more cramped than we remember. We don't return to these places because they are unimportant. We don't return because we have changed. Our perspective has expanded. Our needs have evolved. The same may be true for future civilizations. Imagine humans, or whatever descendants follow us, advancing to a point where time itself becomes a fluid experience. They may see events not as a sequence but as a landscape, all moments laid out like a vast map. In such a reality, returning to one specific century might feel unnecessary, like revisiting a single pebble on a shoreline. The pebble exists, it has meaning, but the shoreline stretches into a horizon so vast that focusing on one tiny detail feels less essential. This concept grows softer and more profound when we consider the possibility that the future may no longer be human in the way we understand. The bodies we inhabit, the senses we rely upon, and even the consciousness we experience could be stepping stones towards something more expansive. The future might involve forms of intelligence that are not bound by breath, muscle, or bone, entities that float through information the way we wade through air. They might perceive time with a clarity we cannot fathom, or experience reality in layers that slip between what we call past and future effortlessly. Imagine beings who think in symphonies instead of sentences, who experience memories and predictions in the same breath, who understand time the way we understand space, able to sense its contours, its slopes, its hidden valleys. For such minds, returning to the 21st century might feel like squeezing into a room far too small, far too dim, far too limited. It would not be disdain. It would be incompatibility. We see echoes of this in our own world. Consider how we look at certain earlier eras of human history. We study them, we appreciate them, but we do not long to return to them, no matter how charming or meaningful they once were. A medieval village might fascinate us, but living in one, crowded, smoky, unpredictable, would be overwhelming. The future may see us the same way. Another possibility is that the future's relationship with time becomes so fluid that going back no longer carries meaning. If time is experienced as a unified whole, not a series of moments, then stepping into our century would feel redundant, like rereading a chapter you already know by heart. The joy lies not in revisiting but in expanding, in moving outward rather than backward. In this sense, our era might be deeply important to the future, but not as a destination. Instead, it exists as a foundation, a root system buried beneath the soil. The roots nourish the tree, but the tree does not return to dig them up. It simply grows. There is another gentle perspective to consider. The future might look back on us with a kind of kindness. Our struggles, our confusions, our hopes, all the things that make the 21st century feel overwhelming to us, might be viewed as the early steps of a civilization learning to walk. The future may not return to visit because doing so would feel like intruding on a toddler's first steps, not out of arrogance, but out of respect. Some moments are meant to unfold without observers. In this way, our century becomes a sacred moment, a chrysalis that should not be touched until its transformation is complete. But perhaps the most poetic angle is this: the future may be so profoundly different that the very concept of tourism fades away. Travel may no longer be driven by curiosity about the past, but by a desire to explore entirely new dimensions of reality. If consciousness expands beyond the boundaries we know, if beings of the future can experience multiple planes of existence or drift through forms of space unfamiliar to us, then visiting earlier centuries might hold no more appeal than visiting old memories. They may love us, they may appreciate us, but they may not need to walk among us. Imagine a violin evolving into a full orchestra, then into a symphony, then into something beyond music entirely. At some point, returning to the single violin string may feel nostalgic but unnecessary. This is how the future might relate to our time, and yet this idea carries no sadness. Instead, it offers a soft sense of acceptance. We are part of something vast. We are a chapter in a story whose later pages may be written in languages we cannot yet imagine. If the future has outgrown us, it does not diminish us. It simply means our place in the story is earlier, no less essential, but complete in its own role. And so, when we look for time travellers and find none, perhaps the answer is not absence, nor caution, nor secrecy. Perhaps the answer is that the future has drifted forward, becoming something we are not yet ready to meet. In this light, we become like a quiet, early photograph in an enormous family archive, treasured, meaningful, but rarely revisited, not because it lacks value, but because the story has grown far beyond its first frame. And as this idea settles around us like twilight, we drift toward the next reflection, one that flips the entire question on its head. What if the anomaly isn't the absence of time travelers? What if the anomaly is us? There's a quiet shift that happens when we turn the question inward. For so long we've asked why time travelers are not here, why our world seems untouched by visitors stepping out of distant centuries. But another possibility drifts into view when we soften our assumptions. What if the absence of travelers tells us nothing about them and everything about us? What if we are the unusual ones, the outlier, the lonely footpath in a sprawling landscape of timelines? To explore this idea gently, imagine the universe as a vast neighbourhood of winding roads. Some roads are busy, lit with lanterns and filled with travellers. Others are quieter, ending in cul-de-sacs where only a few voices echo. Our timeline might be one of those quiet streets, not abandoned, not forgotten, simply peaceful and untouched. A place where visitors rarely wander because the main paths lie elsewhere. This perspective doesn't diminish our world. In fact, it frames it as something rare, a branch of reality sturdy enough to remain closed, steady enough to avoid collapsing under the weight of interference, stable enough that travellers naturally flow around it rather than through it. A hidden alcove in the geography of time. To soften this even further, imagine a garden with thousands of flowers. Most are blooming in bright clusters, their petals unfolding toward the sun. Bees wander among them, moving from one vibrant patch to the next. But in a far corner of the garden, there is a single, quietly growing flower. Smaller, sheltered, untouched by the swarm. Not because it lacks beauty, but because it grows slightly apart, protected by shade. The bees simply do not wander that far. Our timeline may be that quiet blossom. This perspective emerges naturally from the idea of branching universes. If reality splits with each decision, each coincidence, each flicker of possibility, then some branches will be more stable than others. Some will lead to great civilizations with vast technological achievements. Others will drift into silence. And a few, perhaps very few, will form pockets of stability so delicate that travellers avoid them instinctively, the way explorers avoid fragile ecosystems. In this sense, our world is not a thoroughfare. It is a sanctuary. Another gentle implication of this idea is that timelines touched by travellers might become unstable. Imagine a delicate sculpture made of many thin wires. If too many hands touch it, even lightly, its balance begins to falter. If time travellers visit a particular timeline too often, nudging events, observing turning points, offering subtle influences, that timeline might begin to wobble, its internal consistency strained by too many ripples. Perhaps these highly visited timelines collapse or dissolve, merging with other branches, losing their distinct identity. Maybe they fade out like echoes, unable to maintain coherence. In such a universe, the only branches that survive are the quiet ones, the untouched ones. Ours may be one of the survivors precisely because no travellers ever came. This gives the paradox a meaningful twist. We do not see travellers because only the timelines without travellers endure. Imagine a library of countless books, each representing a different version of reality. Some books are opened often, their pages worn thin, their stories altered by constant readers. Others remain pristine, their pages smooth and untouched. Over time, the handled books begin to fray. Some pages tear, some bindings loosen. Meanwhile, the untouched books endure, lasting through eras because no one has disturbed them. We might be one of those enduring volumes. In this sense, our loneliness becomes our strength, not a sign of abandonment, but a testament to our timeline's stability. A timeline that simply does not intersect with the fragile, tangled roots time travellers use. Another angle emerges from the idea of resonance. Imagine that timelines vibrate like strings on a musical instrument. Some strings resonate harmoniously with others, creating chords that allow easy movement between them. Travelers may slip along these harmonizing paths with ease, but other strings resonate at frequencies so unique that transitions into them become difficult or impossible. Our timeline might vibrate at such a unique frequency that travel to it requires impossible precision. Travelers aiming for our era might always land slightly off target, in a neighbouring branch, a similar world, but never precisely here. From their perspective, our timeline might be like a door that never quite aligns with the hallway, a doorway that appears but never fully opens. There is also the humbling possibility that our branch of reality is simply quiet. Quiet in the cosmic sense. Quiet in ways we never notice because quietness, for us, feels normal. Perhaps our universe is unusually stable, unusually orderly, unusually calm compared to other branches filled with greater chaos, greater variability, or greater opportunities for exploration. If you were a traveller navigating the multiverse, you might naturally be drawn to the branches with dramatic differences, the ones with unexpected events or rich historical deviations. Our world, being steady and predictable, might not stand out, not because it lacks value, but because its trajectory is smooth. This leads us to the softer emotional edge of the idea. Being an anomaly does not mean being lesser, it might mean being rare. A timeline so balanced and self-contained that it stands as a quiet refuge in the multiverse. A timeline that thrives precisely because it is not disturbed. In a way, we become the protected ones, not by force, not by intention, but by nature. Our universe may have formed with characteristics that naturally repel temporal interference, like a surface too smooth for seeds to take root. Time travellers might drift near, but never quite reach us. They might see our world the way hikers see a valley from a distant ridge, serene, unchanging, not a place for footsteps, and there is a comforting stillness in this. It means our lives, our choices, our history, large and small, belong wholly to us. No hidden hands, no unseen observers pushing gently from behind the scenes, no subtle nudges altering the river's course. We are the custodians of our timeline, the sole authors of our story. Perhaps that is the true significance of the paradox. Not that time travellers avoid us, but that our world is one of the precious few that remains untouched. A quiet corner of existence where time can unfold in its own steady rhythm. As this idea settles like a warm blanket across the mind, we drift toward the final reflection, the soft landing of this journey, where we contemplate not just the absence of travellers, but the meaning of our own place in the vast story of time. As we drift into the closing moments of this journey, the paradox that sparked everything, the absence of travellers from the future, begins to soften. It no longer feels like a sharp question demanding an answer, but more like a quiet mirror reflecting something deeper about ourselves, our place in the story of time, and the shape of the future we are slowly moving toward. Perhaps the most surprising realization is that the silence we hear around us is not hollow at all. It has texture, it has meaning, and as we listen to it more closely, we begin to sense that the absence of visitors is not a sign of neglect or indifference, but an invitation to look gently at who we are, to reflect on what parts of our era might echo forward, and to wonder what kind of legacy we are weaving stitch by stitch into the fabric of history. To soften this closing thought, imagine time as an enormous tapestry stretched across an infinite loom. The past lies behind us, rich with colour and texture. The future extends beyond our view, still unfinished, threads waiting quietly for hands yet to be born, and we are the weavers of the present, guiding our small but essential section of the design. Visitors from the future may not walk beside us, but we do not weave alone. We weave with the hopes we carry, the fears we confront, the kindness we choose to enact in small, everyday ways. Our absence of travellers does not mean the pattern is empty. The pattern is full of us. But even so, the paradox continues to whisper its soft question. Why does no one return? Why does no one come to see us? And the gentle answer is this. Perhaps no one comes because this part of the tapestry is meant to be woven without outside hands. Our thread requires our touch. Imagine for a moment writing in a journal. There are some entries you would never want to revisit until they are complete. Moments where the ink must dry. Moments where reflection comes later, not during the unfolding. Our era, this strange, contradictory, hopeful century, may be one of those moments. A chapter that only makes sense when read as part of the whole story. In this sense, the future's silence becomes a kind of respect, a trust placed in us, a belief that we must walk through this period without interference, without guidance, without correction, without visitors from tomorrow offering hints of what's to come. Our choices are meant to be ours, our growth meant to be genuine, not curated by unseen observers. This idea echoes softly with another truth. The future that comes after us may be shaped by what we choose now, not by what travellers might come back to change. Our responsibility, then, is not diminished by the absence of visitors. It is heightened. We are the ancestors of every generation to come. Our era may be the seedbed of transformation so vast that future civilizations regard it with reverence. Careful not to disturb it, the way one avoids stepping on newly sprouted grass. But there is also a deeper emotional layer to all this. The paradox asks us not only about time travelers, but about memory and meaning. It gently invites us to wonder, what part of our story will the future choose to remember? What moments will shine brightly enough to be carried forward? What kindnesses, innovations, or mistakes will ripple far beyond our lifetimes? Perhaps no one visits us now because we are living through the prologue, the early strokes of an unfolding masterpiece. Future generations might admire this chapter from afar, not because it is peaceful or polished, but because it is raw and foundational, the moment before everything changes. In this soft light, our loneliness becomes a kind of sacred space, an opportunity to define ourselves without the pressure of being observed by those who come later. There is something beautifully human in that. Something grounding. We have always wondered what future generations would think of us. But maybe the more important question is, what are we doing now that they will remember? What seeds are we planting that they will harvest? And so, the paradox of missing time travellers becomes a meditation on our own place in the cosmic story. Whether time travel is real or not, whether visitors walk in neighbouring timelines or distant branches of the multiverse, our timeline is ours. It is quiet, untouched, unfolding with its own rhythm. We are not characters waiting for someone from the future to step onto our stage. We are authors writing a chapter that no one else can write, and as this thought settles in, like dust drifting slowly through a shaft of warm light, we begin to sense the quiet humility of our position. We are small, yes, but we are also essential. We are temporary, yes, but we are also part of something that stretches far beyond us. Perhaps that is the softest, most meaningful answer to the paradox. The universe trusts us with this moment. It allows us to build the foundations of the future without interference, without correction, without visitors stepping backward to tidy our mistakes or guide our hands. Our solitude is not abandonment, it is permission. And in these final moments of reflection, we are left with a question that does not demand an answer, but offers an opening into gentle wonder. Maybe the greatest mystery is not why no one has come back to visit us, but what part of the story we're writing now that the future will choose to remember. And with that thought resting softly within us, lighter than a feather, quieter than a breath, we let the mind settle, the body relax, and the night unfold around us. The journey continues in dreams.